Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Quarantine Film Series. I am your host, Kabir Segal, and we're back at it again, coming to you live from the ATL, Atlanta, where I am quarantined. I'm quarantined here in Atlanta, in my parents' place, and it's great to be. It's great to be here. And we brought the show back. We brought the show back from our hiatus, and you'll see here who we're going to interview today. But first, let me tell you what we're doing with the show. We did about 120 episodes, and day after day after day, we went on this big hiatus. And this series was initially started as a platform because a lot of creative individuals have had film festivals canceled, have had concerts and gigs canceled. So we're now bringing the show back, and we're so thankful to all of our distribution partners. I think it's important to put the spotlight on incredible filmmakers and artists and musicians, because these are the people that make the art that, challenge us and provoke us and entertain us. So all the people we bring on the show, I hope you check out their links. I hope you check out their streaming links. We put all of their social media up there to follow them, to like their stuff. It's very important. And we're going to probably settle into a cadence of doing this at a certain time and a certain date in the future. But for now, just stay tuned to my social media and you will get notified. Thanks for subscribing to all of the different outlets. Today's a very special show. We have an incredible filmmaker. One of the reasons I love working on the show is because you get to meet incredible people who I've been familiar with their projects for many years now, and putting their projects to the face and seeing who is behind these special projects is really a magical moment. You get to learn about who's working on sort of the signature projects of our time. Today, we have a very remarkable auteur filmmaker. She is a maestra, the highest order. She's directed so many films. We're going to be talking to her about her recent release, A Moonlight Sonata, Deafness in 3 Movements, which was just nominated for a Emmy Award, so fingers crossed for her. And she's coming to us live from Portland. I want to welcome to the broadcast Irene Taylor Brodsky. Welcome to the show. Great to have you here. Great to have you here. Tell me first, Irene, a question I always like to ask is, how has the quarantine affected you? What did you have lined up that has been canceled or postponed?
Well, professionally, I had just gotten a film out into the world. I had just birthed Moonlight Sonata, and I was really going through a couple months of exhale. I was moving my home, and so when this started happening and the governor had us all stay home out here in Oregon, I at that point was developing a film. I was developing 2 films. So it's a good time to develop a film because you can be on the phone, you can read, you can really think and let your mind wander in hopefully positive places. I think there's been a lot of darkness that we're all wandering in these days. And of course, my heart just goes out to so many people around the world who are suffering from COVID, but also just how they're making sense of COVID in their own lives, their own countries. So I have been really just reading a lot, writing a lot, and talking to people on the phone to determine what my next steps are. And I will be starting production in the next month.
Awesome. So it's been somewhat productive. I do want to ask you, do you have a quarantine routine? Do you wake up at a certain time? How do you structure your creative time, or do you keep it loose?
Good question. For the first couple months of quarantine, I was kind of hanging on to old habits, which were getting up at 5:30 in the morning or so and starting my day really early so that I could work with the East Coast. I live here on the West Coast. And I'm just kind of an early bird. But as the quarantine went on, I found myself, staying in bed a little longer and getting up more when my kids got up, which was, 8 or 9 a.m. And then the older ones, the teenagers, were getting up, at noon. I wasn't getting up that late, but so I've become more of a night bird than an early bird, but creatively, I really take whatever time I can get because I live with 3 kids.
Right.
However, what I will say is my sacrosanct time is really for 2 or 3 hours every morning. And as we move on now in the months, that'll probably be in the dark.
Yeah,
So,
I hear you. I hear you. We already have a question coming in, and I'll pop it to you because you mentioned your children. Isaac from St. Louis wants to know, how do you foster creativity among children? How do you help them follow
mm,
the creative path among young people? What would you recommend to parents out there?
mm. I think stay spontaneous. I think we all like push up our sleeves often and say, okay, at this time, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do that. But that's kind of that's a rigid box to put your mind in, I think. And the truth is, every day we don't feel up for it. I know that my brain is freshest in the morning. That's where I have really good ideas. But sometimes my ideas can come in the evening when I'm riding my bike at dusk or something. Now, as a documentary filmmaker, I think that your constitution has to thrive on spontaneity because you're dealing in real life in the present moment, right? I don't script my films. I can have an idea of how I'd like them to go, but I really can't script them. I can't put words in people's mouths, right? So I think being a parent is a daily lesson in that I can guide the ship in the general direction I want it to go, but I really can't control a lot of it. And so part of your skill as a parent and as an artist and trying to make those two things work together, I find if you can just respond to the spontaneity with a bit of a shoulder shrug and say, okay, this isn't going to happen today. Or, wow, I find myself right now with 2 hours. What am I going to do with it? So, I think you just have to be flexible. And I always just marvel at people who really can live a very scheduled life because I've never been able to, even before I had kids, because I was a doc filmmaker. I'd get a call from my subject. This is happening. That's happening. And you just have to drop everything and go. It's kind of, like uh, it's certainly not an essential service in the way we speak of essential services these days, but you really do have to accept that your time is not your own. So, and I think I've lost you.
Here I am.
Hi.
You there? Sorry about that. Looks like in
Okay.
125 shows, first time that's happened.
Okay.
Tell us, I want to ask about Moonlight Sonata and such a beautiful tale. How would you describe it in your words? What is Moonlight Sonata? And what is the story that you weave throughout it?
Moonlight Sonata, Deafness in Three Movements is a film about my son growing up and my father growing old and Beethoven as he was writing the Moonlight Sonata. All three of them were deaf, and my son is deaf, my father's deaf, and Beethoven was going deaf when he was writing the Moonlight Sonata. So we really have a lot of uh, deafness in my family, and we are. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted because I didn't turn my notifications off. Are they popping up on your
No, no,
screen?
no, no, not at
Okay,
all.
they're popping in my brain and they're confusing me. Anyway, so I filmed my son the year he decided to learn Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. He did not know that Beethoven wrote it while he was going deaf, but through the course of learning the piece with his music teacher, my whole family started to discover things about ourselves as well as about Beethoven and also really about the way we create music. And so, ultimately, I think the film became an intimate look at my family and how we grapple with deafness in my family, because I have deaf parents and a deaf son. And really that we see it differently, maybe, than a lot of people do.
What was in terms of creating it, how long did it take you to do it? Talk to me about the craft. What did you shoot it on, camera wise? Walk me through
Hmm.
that.
So we shot primarily with what I would call sort of like, for those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, the Sony Walkman of documentary filmmaking, which these days is the Canon C300. So it's just it's a real workhorse of a verite film camera. if you need to, you can strap on microphones and you can have several channels of audio coming in. That was sort of our workhorse camera, but we also shot with, drone cameras. We also used video from the 80s, film from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. We used lots of still photographs. We even shot a couple of scenes because this is what we had in our hand with our iPhone. And so it's a real, it's not a purist film in that technical regard. It's really more, it's a film that we shot about a family, and with the family, you need to have these cameras at the ready all the time.
Exactly. And then what did you edit on, and what was the editing process like?
So I co-edited the film with Bill Weber, who also edited my film, The Final Inch, and another one of my films called The Listening Project. And Bill lives in San Francisco, and he started editing the film for the first 8 months or so. And then as time moved on, and we were isolating the more personalized family scenes and family vignettes, I took over some of the editing, and I would stay up late into the night and really edit them in a way that sort of felt personally right for me. And so in the end, the film was a real collaboration between the two of us, and we shot on Adobe Premiere, or I'm sorry, we edited on Adobe Premiere. And the whole editing process took about 14 months probably. And when we first started editing, we didn't actually have the notion for me to narrate the film. We first tried to make the film without any narration, but ultimately we decided to more of throughout the film.
Got it. And one thing I loved was the music. Talk to us a little bit about the music of the project and how you put that together.
Yeah, well, the first was to find a composer who would not be intimidated by making a film about Beethoven's music. And I found a wonderful composer named Dylan Stark and his colleague Ben Johnson. They are both in their 20s. They live here in Portland, Oregon. And they had just finished working on a film before mine called Life Animated, which was nominated for an Oscar a few years ago, made by Roger Ross Williams. And I really loved the music in that film. And I asked Roger who he used, and that's how I met Dylan. And lo and behold, he happened to live in my same town. So Dylan basically bought an upright piano because he wanted to do his piano work with a lot of ambient, almost an analog sound to it. And so he gave us probably 20 tracks when we started editing the film, just in the first couple of months, which is a little unusual because we actually had original music for the film to work with. And then the more we liked what he sent, and there were other things we said, well, we don't want to go so much in that direction, we'd rather go in this direction, he kept giving us more of the direction we were liking. And so he had a highly prolific period in the beginning where probably for a 2-month period, he sent us 40 tracks. And then in the months after that, 2 or 3 at a time would peter in, because by then we were finding homes for all these different music tracks. And then we would say, well, we'd like to do a variation on this. We'd like it to be faster, slower, more melancholy, maybe put that in a minor key, something like that.
Got it. You've obviously been affected very closely with deafness being in your family. Rachel in Mobile, Alabama is asking, how do you know when you create a film, how much of yourself to put into it? Kind of a broad question. What do you think about that?
Well, I think as a general rule, you want to put as little of yourself in it as possible. I had to be persuaded in this film to put my voice in it. I had done this once before in what I would call the spiritual prequel to this film called Here and Now, where I also tell you a story, in this case about my mother and father, Paul and Sally. Here and Now was made as my first feature documentary back in 2007. And I really had to write out my thoughts, write out my general structural idea. And then as a general rule, I wanted to cut it down by 75%. So you still want your footage to be telling the story, and you want your characters to be telling the story. But what my role is, I'm not really a narrator, because a narrator, you get the sense that like someone's explaining what's going on. I think of myself as a guide who hopefully you can trust. And if I have skin in the game or I have a bias, you need to know that right up front. So that's why the very first line of Moonlight Sonata is my son looking at me, looking at the camera and saying, "Mom," right? So right away, oh, the woman behind the camera is this kid's mom,
Hmm.
and so I have skin in the game, so obviously, it's going to be that relationship. And the question I think becomes is, how honest will I be? So I think, once you do commit, it's really not worth doing unless you're really honest with your audience. And it's not like I was betraying anyone in my honesty, but you really have to, um, make your role in the film an asset and not something that makes it feel sluggish or cumbersome, or worst of all, makes you not like the characters because you don't like the filmmaker.
Hmm.
That's what I was worried about. What if someone doesn't like me? I don't want them to, if they
Yeah,
don't like my role in the film, I'm afraid they're not going to like my characters.
totally.
So yeah.
Matilda here in Boise, Idaho is asking, um, you've been
Oop, I lost you. I've been what? I lost you again.
oh, I'm back.
Okay.
Good to have a backup here. The um,
Yeah.
the question is Matilda in Boise, Idaho is asking this your recent film. How did you grow during this film? Because you're doing such intensely personal projects. That
Hmm.
how did you your transformation as a filmmaker? The more distance you have from it, because the film's been out for a
Hmm.
while now. What did you
Hmm.
take away from it this time around? Every project changes you. How did this project change you?
Mm. Um, well, I think I got better at putting myself in the film than I did the first time, because it was my second time around doing it. Um, and I think if anything, very much, I came out of it just very much aware of how there has to be a very good reason to put a filmmaker in a film. But I also moved forward as an artist, I think, because I was focusing on my family and on my children and on my parents. And it was a very difficult time, some days when, they just wanted mom to sit and have dinner with them. And instead, mom was filming them having dinner. And, the majority of the time, I was their family member. But there were parts of the day, of every day, that I would film.
Yeah.
And they didn't always understand like why I would choose to turn the camera on and why I didn't. And sometimes that was hard. And most of the time, if they really had a problem with it, I would turn the camera off. But sometimes it was important to be there for those difficult moments. And so you just really have to somehow commit and make an agreement with the people you're filming with. Like, I am going to stick with you through thick or thin, and I need you to stick with me through thick or thin, you know? And so, but, if there's ever uh, a real issue, I would always turn the camera off.
Yeah, I hear you. Now, in some of our exchange, you were mentioning how your recent film is a complement to Between Sound and Silence. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this film and
Yeah.
sort of the narrative arc of it.
Yeah, the New York Times asked if I would do an op doc about my place between sound as a hearing person and the silence that is both, my parentage and my child. And in in that in that film, I basically talked with it's a short film where I talk with about 12 or 13 people, all who choose to put technology inside their bodies through cochlear implants so that they can uh, listen and hear as typically as possible. And these people are really the ones who are between sound and silence more than me, because they can literally turn it on and off. And because it was the New York Times and it's called an op-ed film or an op doc, you also write an essay with it. And that was actually a real challenge for me, because it really forced me to think about politically where I stand on a spectrum, of people's inclinations to choose the way they communicate, and really I'm very respectful of people who choose to want to speak and listen, and I'm very respectful of people who want to sign. I sign, but I also made a choice for my son, which was to use this technology. So, part of that experience making that film was me sort of reconciling and coming to terms with my own feelings politically, as well as a human being and a parent, and Here and Now and Moonlight Sonata, both of them, sound becomes a character in my films. And so what I'm really trying to do is sensitize people the way I have been sensitized about sound, I think. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear you. I was trying to lip read you, but I
Oh,
couldn't.
sorry. I can maybe
Okay.
sign it. I can sign it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I hear you.
The question is from Alexandra, wanting to be an aspiring documentarian. What advice do you have for her on how to crack into the field?
I think well, first I would recommend two things. I would recommend start making your own movies right now when you get off this call. Just start making movies. There's no reason why you can't. Everything's at your fingertips. I mean, if you've got one of these, right, you can do it. And start doing that, because that gives you real life experience with those awkward moments you feel when you're putting a camera up in front of someone or in front of an object. The second thing is to try to work with a filmmaker who has a style that you can somewhat emulate. It may not be exactly what you like, but if it's, for example, if you are interested in someone who works a lot in historical documentaries, you want to find someone who works a lot with archival imagery and tells historic stories. If you're really interested in someone who's more avant-garde because that's what you like to do, like try to find someone like that. But if you're living in a location where there aren't documentarians, which is many places, um, I really think what you do is you just start making your own, and you just learn. You just learn as much as you can that way.
You're getting a firsthand look at the weather in Atlanta right now. Rolling thunderclouds. Last question for you. Who are your favorite documentarians, your inspirations over the years?
Well, when I was in college, my professor at NYU, Tish, was George Stoney,
Hmm.
and he was a documentarian who was making films in the late 30s and the 40s, and he is really just a real force to behold, not just in observational filmmaking, but he really had a strong sense of social justice. And so I really, really admired him from the get go. And he really spoon fed me and all of us, the works of um, all of the documentary verite masters from the 1960s. And that's really what I like the best to this day, is really just having an observational style. I've never considered myself too jazzy with my work. I don't try to have the graphics be um, too layered on top of the material. So I like things to have a pretty simple look. I like real life, and I just want to show real life as authentically as I can. And if the light is poor or the sound is not great, I shoot it anyway. So I never like to speak names, partly because I'm afraid if I try to recall two or three of them, I'm going to forget the other four or five that I know I love. But generally, I would say I've always been very, very most interested in my verite forefathers and mothers. Hold on, sorry,
Yeah.
my son is calling me.
All good.
Yes.
Everyone watching, please check out vermillionpictures.com. You see the link streaming at the bottom. We're big fans of Irene and wishing her all the best at the upcoming Emmys. Check out all of her movies. You can see it on our website, on our portfolio page. And so that is our broadcast for today. Thanks everyone for coping with all my technical issues here. Now you know why I need. Yeah, now you know why I need Shane. Shane is over in Spain. He's usually producing these shows. So, Shane, I miss you.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. Have a good evening, and we will
Okay.
talk soon. Take care.
Okay, thanks. Bye.